Hello, everyone. We're just giving everyone a couple of minutes to join, and then we will get rolling. Once again, for those just joining, we will get started momentarily. We've got a few folks still rolling in. All right, I've got 6:01, and it looks like we've got quite a crowd already assembled here. So I think we'll get rolling. My name is Jensen Pennock, and on behalf of Centric Consulting in PMI South Florida, welcome to evening's webinar. For our opening remarks, I'd like to introduce Gustavo Rosales, President of PMI South Florida. Gustavo.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. I'd like to give you the warmest welcome to the seminar today, along with Centric Consulting, who has been gracious enough to facilitate this platform for us and deliver on you content that is valuable, meaningful, and very worthy in today's environment. I'll be very brief by saying that for the last few months, our organization, as many others, have struggled to re-identify ourselves and find ways, meaningful ways to deliver our mission to our membership. We have found that these partnerships with organizations throughout our area have paid off very, very well, and we bring this to you tonight. I see that we have nearly 200 people on the session tonight, and that is very pleasing for us all, because it means that what we're doing is what you want to see, hear, learn from. So thank you very much for joining us today. The chapter is absolutely thrilled to have partnered with Centric Consulting, and I'll hand it off to Michael McNett for the continuation of our webinar. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gustavo. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate your generosity, as well as including us in your PMI program. So we definitely appreciate it. So what we're going to be talking about tonight, obviously everybody knows because you signed up for hopefully this webinar, not another one. My name is Michael McNett. I typically go by Mike, and at Centric Consulting, I am the office teamwork lead, and I've been with Centric Consulting for about 2 years now. And my previous experience includes 30 years as an Army veteran, and retired from the U.S. Army back in 2012, and then went into IT consulting. And been here in Columbus, Ohio, and over the last 2 years in particular, really been focused a lot on Microsoft Teams. And that's definitely what we're going to cover today. It's not a demonstration of Teams, but instead it's a demonstration and a discussion and advising about Teams and how it can be used to enable better project management. And whether you are doing things virtually like we are today, many of us are doing today because of COVID, or you're doing it in person when you have actually physically co-located people. This subject and the way Teams can be used within project management is the exact same. You can contact me there through any of those, and at the very end, we also have some contact information for Centric in general. The agenda, we have so much to cover tonight, we really do. And trying to fit all of this into 45 minutes. As I was building out the slides, I was thinking, how am I possibly going to do this? So I tried to really narrow it down to what I think the people, the audience in tonight's meeting would actually appreciate the most. And what we would like to do is to try to get a better understanding of who we have meeting with us tonight. And we have a poll coming up, and that poll is basically trying to understand where you sit in terms of teams and projects. Jansen?
All right. So poll number 1 is, what is your experience with using Microsoft Teams to support a project? Option 1, I've never used Microsoft Teams. 2, I regularly use Teams, but not for project management. Or 3, I regularly use Teams for basic project management activity. And we've got the results rolling in here, pretty evenly spread, so we'll give a little bit more time. Closing in on the 80% voted mark here.
Great.
All right. So interesting in the sense that not unexpected that number 1 is I regularly use Teams, but not for project management. So we've got that in the lead at 48%. But then it basically a dead heat between I've never used Microsoft Teams and I regularly use Microsoft Teams for basic project management activities.
Excellent. Well, this is a great audience then. And I think the way we have the slide structured and the content will be useful to pretty much the entire audience. And don't worry for those that have never used Teams. I do give a quick introduction at the beginning about what is Teams. So thanks for that poll. We're going to have one other poll later on, trying to get a better feel about some of those project management tools that you actually use. So real quickly, trying to figure out the rationale behind even having this webinar tonight. So first off, projects. Most of our people out there are probably project managers, either formally or informally. And obviously, you know, in order to do a project well, you have to deliver those projects on time, on budget, in scope. That just makes sense. That's what we've all been taught from day one. And then within that, in order to meet all those requirements, you have to manage all these different artifacts and deliverables, and you have to manage those stakeholders. And that really comes down to managing those people. So those people, you're interacting with so many different people, both internal on maybe if you're a project management consulting company and you have your internal team, but also those stakeholders when you're trying to help those projects. Well, those people are definitely so important. And what we find is a lot of the different project management tools out there, just using project management tools, they may lack a little bit in that communication and collaboration piece when you're trying to get your group together. So it's also, if you have poor communications, that's typically the number 1 reason why projects fail. And the great thing about Teams is Teams brings all 3 of these things together. In particular, the people side of it, where you can bring your deliverables together, you bring in your artifacts together, you bring in your planning charts, and you bring the people in, and you keep them inside of Teams, working in all these different areas. So that's why personally I find Teams to be extremely valuable when you're managing projects. I am going to go through these slides very, very quickly tonight, but the recording will be provided out to our audience, I believe tomorrow. So Teams, for that 25% or so that have never seen Teams, this is what it looks like. You're actually going to see it in practice later on in 2 different demonstrations that I have as well. And on the left-hand side, you have your whole client interface here, and you can click onto these little buttons and see different things. You'll see that coming up. And this would be a team, this would be a team, and these things in here are channels. Don't worry, it's not a full education and training on Teams tonight, but instead we want to learn how to integrate different parts into Teams. So Teams itself, from a more descriptive purpose behind it, the description is it's basically a single pane of glass. It's a hub where people can work together and integrate all these things together. Many organizations, when they first stood up Teams, especially during this COVID-19, they're primarily using it for chats, meetings, and calls. There's so much more to it than that, especially when you start talking about how can I leverage Teams in order to better provide project management for my organization. And that cross-organization, being able to get groups together across your entire organization and even outside of your organization when you can invite external people into your part of the project management solution and let them be a part of the day-to-day collaboration and communication, getting away from a lot of that email stuff that many project managers just are stuck with. And now you have the ability to put all of that inside of Teams. And the adoption side of this, it can be very quickly adopted, as we've seen across COVID-19, but at the same time, it has to be done properly. It has to be done intentionally. You just can't turn it on and expect it to just grow and be beautiful and everybody is happy. No, there's definitely some adoption piece of that we're going to talk about later on. And that last bullet, that's probably one of the main reasons why many of you joined tonight, in that how can I use Teams to integrate with some of those project management tools? And in the demonstrations and some of the different slides, you're going to actually see that. Teams itself, what is it? So from a conceptual view, Teams is what's shown on the right there, where you have your group chat, you have audio streams, you can video and screen share, you can deliver all your content, and you can put all of this stuff together. But my own personal view of Teams is that entire view, that entire grouping of all of these different tools in the Office 365 platform. But in addition, and the reason why is because Teams can integrate with all of these different things. You can get to your recordings. You can actually have a whiteboard session during a meeting. But from the project management perspective, you can also integrate with tools like Planner and Trello. Those, Planner in particular, is part of Office 365. But those other ones that I just noted there, Trello, Asana, Smartsheets, all of those are outside of Office 365, not even Microsoft products. But you can, if you wanted, to integrate with a product like Microsoft Project Online. So the nice thing about this tool is you're providing a system to integrate and put all of this information together and actually work directly with those main project management tools that everybody's used to. So again, this is just a couple visual depictions of what is Teams if you have it installed. By the way, if you don't have Teams today, you as a private citizen, you can go out and download Teams and use it day to day just for your personal side. So what can you do? What I'm showing right here is files. You store files inside of Teams and you collaborate on those files. In addition, the mobile application is a really nice interface so that you can pretty much have almost a one-to-one parity of what you have on the client as well as in the browser. You can have that same type of functionality on your mobile application. In addition, you can do calls. If you have a calling plan as an example, you can use a regular old phone number to contact people inside of Teams as well as outside. But if you don't have that calling plan, you can still contact people by just clicking on that little phone button and it'll contact that person in Teams. In addition, the calendar tightly integrated with your Outlook calendar so that if you schedule a meeting either from within this interface here or over in Outlook and say that it's a Teams meeting, it shows up in this calendar, and pretty nice feature as far as that integration between those two systems. Planner. Planner is a very lightweight task management, project management solution. It's not necessarily useful for very large, very complex project management, but it is a nice tool to help manage tasks at the individual level or group levels. This is an example of one of those third-party solutions, in this case Asana, where it has a very tight integration with Teams. Depending on the type of tool that you have, it can be a one-way direction or two-way direction integration with some of those types of tools, such as Asana, Smartsheet, Trello, and a whole bunch of others. And why is this important? Especially since COVID, we have definitely seen a huge increase in the use of Teams. A lot of organizations have come to us to help, for us to help them deploy it, organize it, and increase that adoption, and also to govern their systems. Well, why is this actually hitting? Well, back in March, when COVID really started to take off, what this graph is showing is the use, the engagement in Teams over time. And as you see, Italy really started to expand its use of Teams, and America, I can't wait for Microsoft to produce the next set of graphs of these showing the continued growth in Teams. Well, as these Teams usage goes up and more companies are using it, one of the key areas that they're using it for are meetings. And this is a graph showing across the same timeline from back in the beginning of March, how many meeting minutes there were across time, and the number of meeting minutes, the number of meetings was growing exponentially. So why does this really matter? It matters because if you have your workforce moving to teams to do their day-to-day collaboration, day-to-day communication, and getting further away from things like email and doing those conversations and meetings inside teams, to me, it just makes a lot of sense just to bring project management into that same platform where those people engage today. So again, it really doesn't matter whether we hit COVID or not. The same concepts, the same information that I'm providing today would be just as valid if we weren't even in COVID-19. So we're about ready to hit off on a project initiation demo and showing you how we can create teams and use those for project management. But in order to do that, let's go ahead and get a better understanding. So it's time for a poll again. Let's get a better understanding of some of those project management tools that you use. Jansen?
So poll number 2 should be up on your screen now. What project management tools do you use today? Please select all that apply. So you can choose from Microsoft Project, Microsoft Planner, Asana, Trello, or other.
Great.
Seeing some interesting trends here as this comes in. Give folks a little bit more time, but yeah, we're in the 80, yeah, about 85% of the votes are in. So far and away, Microsoft Project at number 1, Planner, Microsoft Project number 1, other at number 2.
Okay.
Planner at number 3, Trello, and then Asana.
Excellent. Yeah, when we were putting this slide together, or this poll together, it was so hard to choose from all these different project management tools. And in the end, you're gonna hear me say, you know, as far as which tool should I use, I really don't care. Many of these tools can actually integrate directly within Teams. So we're going to talk about that, but it helps us understand, especially, I did find it interesting about using Microsoft Project as number 1 and then Planner number 3. So that's good to hear. All of these different tools that you see here can be integrated directly within Microsoft Teams. And I got a couple slide screenshots of how you could actually use this. So this is an example, and I'll actually show you a live team that has this. And this is simply showing a file that exists inside of a team, in this case, inside of the general PMO channel. And it's an Excel sheet. And I surface it inside of a tab inside of that team. It's a fully editable Excel document if you want, but you don't even have to just restrict yourself to Excel. Later on in a demo, you're going to see using a Microsoft Word document inside of this as well. So just being able to pin those up in that tab within your different channels, your different teams, makes it immediately accessible and visible to those people. So the most important things, most important information sources, typically you'll find up in those tabs. Another example, OneNote. OneNote I've used over the years off and on, but now that OneNote's tightly integrated with Microsoft Teams, almost always when I create a team, the very first thing I do is I create a OneNote notebook inside of my team, because I want all of the team members to collaborate and use that exact same notebook. If you're a project manager, you've come across this problem multiple times where everybody keeps their own notes in their own places, and hopefully they try to consolidate. Many times they just get lost, and it's so hard to really figure out what is the current state of all these notes. So OneNote being tightly integrated is a phenomenal addition to Microsoft Teams. So for those people out there using Microsoft Project, it is an integration here. So in this case, I connected to an underlying Microsoft Project site. So all I did was I added that as a tab within this team called Mark 8 Project Plan and in the channel called General. So very easy, took all of about, I don't know, 20 or 30 seconds to get that integration there. If you have Power BI, so for those that are using Project Online, you might have a portfolio dashboard already built into Power BI. And as long as that's built out, it's immediately accessible. You add that tab, again, in about 30 seconds, you can present that, and you can put that in any channel, any team, wherever you want across your environment. This is an example of Planner. Planner has the ability to have buckets, almost like a Kanban board, and I can create tasks and click on it, and I can assign tasks to different people. I can assign dates associated with those. I can add labels to those, and those people that are being assigned will be immediately notified that Mike went and gave them a task, and here's the date, and they'll be periodically reminded you still have a task due within Planner. You can also create polls. So this is something called Polly. And Polly has the ability to quickly add a very simple question out there. And in this case, I was asking the team, hey, how many project hours are you going to burn this week? Let them answer it, and immediately, almost like the poll that you took during this webinar today, immediately the results come back when everybody has actually voted on it. I get an answer back, and it helps me manage the project itself. And then all of these other tools on the right-hand side are just some other example tools that I know project managers use that you can directly integrate within Microsoft Teams. But we're not going to go through all those. Again, if you have Teams, if you ever try to add an app, right now there's over 500, I think 550 different apps that you can add. Many of those, or a good portion of those, are project management related in one way or another. So some quick advice as far as using these different tools. If the application integration doesn't exist today, it might tomorrow. Or if it doesn't meet your needs today, it might tomorrow. A good example of that was Asana. Just a couple of weeks ago, they announced a significant improvement in their overall integration with Teams, much better than what it used to be. So a lot of these companies continue to advance their integrations. In addition, some standardization can be helpful. If you can standardize some of these tools within your project management office, all the project managers are shaking their head, yeah, it can be helpful. So it can be helpful for IT as well, as far as supporting those from a Teams perspective if you do this integration. And ultimately, those team members, as they start crossing the lines and working on different projects. Really key piece of advice here is use your template. Within Teams, you can create templates that can be reused. OneNote, you can create templates. Plans, you can reuse. Channels and file folder structures, you can reuse. We're going to talk about some of those limitations as we get into the demo, though. Bring in external guests. Now that you have Teams up and running, there's no reason that you can't invite an external guest, and that's what we did in the one example coming up. Governance and adoption, don't overlook it. Don't think you can just turn it on and suddenly your project managers and all your project members are going to be able to understand this and use it, especially if you don't provide them some type of construct around it. So we're going to jump into this demo right now. And again, there's two different demos. This one's going to be real quick, and then the next one, we're going to show you something similar to this, but with a lot more automation behind it. In this case, in the demo, we're going to quickly create a team, provide some channels out there, and then right, can you hear me? All right, I got muted somehow there. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into this demo real quick. And let me get things going here. Here we go. This is my Teams environment. And this is like that portfolio. This is just a Power BI view of my overall portfolio, but that's not what we want to show. Instead, let's show you how quickly it can be to create these different teams and configure those to support a project. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new team. Click on this join or create a team. I'm going to click on create a team. I'm going to build it from scratch. This is where you could potentially use other teams as a template, if you will. But in this case, we're going to build it from scratch just to show you how easy it can be. I can create a private team where people have to request to join it. That would be most appropriate for this one. So in this case, we're going to call it Salesforce Deployment Project. And I typically would want to put in more description than that, but I'm going to click on create. At this moment in time, it's creating that workspace, that single hub where all of our project members related to this project can join and collaborate within. And I'm going to add a couple different people to this. I'm going to add Deborah Berger. I'm going to add Joni Sherman. and Megan Bowen. I'm going to click on add. At that moment in time, they would have gotten an email saying, hey, Mike went and created this team for you. And I will make Deborah Berger also the owner of this, and click on close. Now at the bottom of my Teams interface, you'll see that Salesforce deployment. And what we want to do now is create some channels that would be useful to a project manager. So instead of just having that general channel, we're going to add another channel, and let's call this initiation phase. And I would typically put in a description. I'm going to automatically show it to everyone. Everyone will have access to it. And I'll do 2 more. So there's that channel that just popped up. I'll add another channel. We'll call it planning phase. And I'll let everyone have it and automatically show it in their list. And lastly, I'm going to create a execution phase. Show it, click on add. We'll talk about private channels quickly in just a minute. And there we go. Within each one of these different channels, this is where you're going to have conversations, in this case, about initiation, getting ready to actually conduct your project. Inside of the planning phase, this is where we're going to have conversations about the plans. And once you get to the execution phase, that's where we're going to have conversations about the execution phase. But the real power here is being able to store information about each of these phases. So now I'm containerizing and grouping all of those conversations and documents together in one area. So in this case, I could upload a file, and I'll put my team's training plan in there. At this point in time, everybody that's a member of the Salesforce deployment project has access to this team's training plan PowerPoint slide. And they can come in, they can edit, they can view it, they can comment on it, they can have conversations around it. And when I look at the posts, now this is where people can start have conversations about that file along with a whole bunch of other things. Next, I want to add a OneNote. Remember I said that is one of the very first things that I do. I'll click on this tab, and let me actually put this inside of the general channel. That's where we will, in this case, I'm gonna keep most of my notes. I'll click on my OneNote. It's gonna give me a selection of where to place this. There's our notebook that I will save into. And it's gonna build this in the background. At this point in time, it gets built out, and now I can start adding sections like my meeting notes, my lessons learned, all of the different sections that you would typically find in a OneNote notebook, or maybe in a very long Word document, or however you manage your notes. Now everyone gets to contribute this at the exact same time. And next, I'm going to go ahead and add an Excel file. But before I do that, let me go and show you how quickly I can create an Excel file. And I'll click on New, click on Excel, and we'll call it Burn Down. Create it. At this point in time, it's stored inside of that team, inside of that channel. I can add, I didn't want to do that. I can start adding my different notes. Date, hours, and I don't know, status. And again, anybody within this team can come in and do the exact same thing that I'm doing at the same time that I'm working this. And let's say this burn down chart is something that I want everybody to access. So I'm going to simply click on this and say, make this a tab. At this point in time, just like that notebook that we created, we now have an Excel document that is our burn down. So with looking in here, that'll come up, there we go. So instead of actually opening up that file, all I have to do is tell people to go to that tab. In addition, I can do things like this. I'm gonna add that portfolio. So this is a Power BI app that was pre-built. It's inside of this app here, and click on save. I'm not gonna post to the channel about it. And now that Power BI portfolio is going to show across this team just like it was showing in those others. And there we go. Last thing I'm going to quickly show is Planner. Planner, some of you are using Planner out there. That was the number 3 option today. I click on Planner and I'm going to create a new one. And this is Salesforce tasks. I could use an existing one, but in this case, I'm just going to use this one. And at this point in time, I can start adding tasks. I can start adding buckets. So within just a few minutes, we were able to show lots of data and how quickly and easy it is to create a team and be able to support a project. Other example integrations, I'm not going to go through these. I really don't have time. We got about 15 minutes left in this part of the presentation, but these are just some of those tools that you can use as a tab, but there's hundreds of these that you can add as a tab. Planner, that's another example of it, showing you the mobile view of it. This is showing DevOps. If you're a DevOps company, utilizing that to help manage code, DevOps, tight integration within Microsoft Teams. Trello, another example, and this is where it shows where I can interact. I can send information to Trello as well as receive information from Trello, all from within Teams. And let's talk about automation. So what I've done so far was all manual in nature. And as we all know, those manual steps is very error prone, especially with people like me. So what I would like to do is try to figure out how can I automate this? And what I'm doing is to do this automation, I have a form that puts information into this projects list. So it's like a request list. Hey, I want a new team created based for this project. Once I have that SharePoint project list created, I'm going to add a Power App form inside of my team, and I'm going to be able to enter information in that. After I enter the information in there, a workflow kicks off inside of Power Automate. That workflow, it says whenever a new project is added to that SharePoint list, go out to Azure Automation, let Azure Automation create that team for me and configure it with several different channels. And then at the very end, I also wanted to actually create a project online site. And at the end, it's going to post a message back to my PMO channel saying, I created this team for you, and I also created this project online site for you. That's some of the code that sits inside of that Azure Automation. And at the very end, I can take that project online site and put it directly in there as a tab. So let's go ahead and do this automation. I'm back in my team, and I have a PMO team that was created. And I have this general channel. And in this case, I pinned it to the top as a channel because that's a very frequent one that I use. And inside of there, I have this thing called New Project. There's that Power App. And once this loads, I click on this little plus sign. And inside of there, I'm going to call this Demo for PMI project. Visibility, I can make it a private or a public team, just as you saw when I was manually doing this. And let's go ahead and make it a public one. Project description, I'll just copy that. The project manager, now I can do things like show me Deborah Berger. Maybe I make her the project manager. But in this case, I'm going to make myself as the administrator, the project manager. I'm going to create a start date because that directly relates to the project online site that's being created. I want to allow external guests in this team because I want to collaborate outside of it with the entire group that we have watching today. And then I'm going to create a private channel that only a small subset of the overall members see. And I click on that. And in the background now, there's some automation going on. That's when that Microsoft Flow kicks off, and that is when the Azure Automation kicks off. At the bottom of this, we're going to see in hopefully a minute or two, it could be out as long as maybe 5 minutes, but I don't think so, that we're going to see a team automatically be created. So we're going to come back to this in a second. While that is continuing to work through, let's quickly take a look at some of the other organizational decisions. So for those that are out there using Teams and Project, maybe you need a little extra advice. And at some point, perhaps you have some advice back to me to help me continue my education as well. Organization decisions, we're going to talk about organization of channels, we're going to talk about tools and automation, and then adoption and governance. Two primary ways that I typically have seen and recommend approaching projects within teams. This one where I create one team per project. The other option is I create one channel per project. My preference by far is the one on the left, one team per project. So I create a team called Deploy Dynamic CRM, and then I create my channels. So it could be by phases like you see here. I also am actually a bigger fan of having one team per project and putting the work streams, the main work streams, creating those as channels within there. I think most project members, that's typically where they like to stay within, no matter which phase they're in. Hey, I'm in the adoption work stream or I'm in the migration work stream. Let me stay within that one channel. To the most of the members, usually that makes more sense. From a project manager perspective, perhaps this makes more sense to you, but in the end, this is definitely my preference. This one channel per project, so in this case, maybe you have one group, so in this case, a department like HR, and the HR says, I'm going to create all of my projects as individual channels there. Or if this is like a customer that you're doing a project for, or maybe several projects. Contoso is your company project, your company name, and then you have several different projects that you're doing for them. I really don't like this because these channels typically aren't granular enough to do a good job in your project management. So let's see if our team has been built yet. There it is. So it created a general channel. Every single team will have a general channel. And then I have that code built out so that it also builds these other channels by default. So whenever I create a new team by clicking on this little plus, they will all look like this, including this little lock on it where there's a leadership channel where I can come in here and say only Deborah Berger and myself are part of that leadership channel. Nobody else can see it. Nobody else can see our conversations or the documents that we're collaborating on. And this is just one small example. There's so much more that you can do in automation. You can automate not only the creation of these different teams, but also the deletion or archiving of these teams in the end. But then you can also get really fancy and start saying, I want to configure not just the channels, but I also want to configure the tabs. I want to point them to things like a planner. I want to point them to a OneNote. I want to point them to Trello or whatever the different tools are. So you can configure that, as well as many projects, you have a standard file structure, folder structure, and wouldn't it be nice if I could just plop in all of those standard template documents that I want to use for my project, and not just this project, but the next 100 projects. So being able to automate a lot of that through a tool like Power Automate, Graph API, and others really can provide a lot of standardization and overall efficiency and effectiveness for PMOs, especially the larger ones. So the last thing I would do in here, if I go back to my PMO and I look at my post, here's the message that was posted. And it says, here was the PMI project that was created, and it actually even created this project online site. I'm going to click on that. And inside of here, this is where I would start building out my entire project plan. And now what I did is I copied that URL. I'm going to go back to my team, and let's go back down to my general channel. And again, we're going to add a tab, and that way everyone can have access to that website, that project online site. I click on website, project is the name of the tab. The URL is the one that was just created by me, created by the automation. Click on save, and now they have immediate access. So again, main purpose of Teams, keep everybody inside that workspace. If I am part of this team, part of this project, I'm going to do almost all my work inside of this team. My own personal work now at Centric, I spend 90%, 85, 90% of my time inside of Teams because we're able to configure it and do all of this. As far as tools and automation, so a lot of people are like, wow, I like the automation, that definitely could help. And really, you gotta look a little bit more deeper into that and do some further analysis. What tools should you use in Teams? Whatever you're using today. Determine what are those integration points that you wanna make in Teams. figure out what is possible with those tools, figure out what are those gaps, do some gap analysis, and figure out, can I continue to use those tools? Or maybe there's a way that I can invest in another tool that is more tightly integrated to meet our needs. And as far as how much you should automate, really depends on your organization. I can't give a black and white answer to it. It's how much standardization does your PMO require? What is your project complexity? How frequently do you create all these projects? And do you have the skills and resources to support that automation, not just in the initial design and implementation, but also the longer term maintenance of that code. And this slide I'm not going over at all. This slide here is basically to help you analyze that question and figure out, do I need to automate? If I do need to automate, how much do I really want to invest in this? The one thing I would like to point out is on the right-hand side is coming up, I don't know exactly what time, hopefully this year, Microsoft is providing some improved templates out there so that you can actually create a library of template sites that have a lot more features and functionality than the current template capabilities that you have in Teams. Govern. I definitely don't want to leave this webinar without talking about governance and adoption. What I just showed you looks very simple. I've been doing this for quite a while, and it is simple, but at the same time, don't take it for granted. If you just leave this grow, here's a problem that you'll have. A recent client that I've been working with, they turned it on to helping COVID, and within 6 weeks, they had 1,250 teams, I think it was, because they had no governance. They had no policies around how and when do I create it. And on top of that, they didn't have any governance around when do I delete and get rid of these teams, and how do I manage that whole life cycle. So these are just some of the different parts of governance that you need to consider when you're deploying teams. And then the last part there, adoption. You have to be intentional about it. There are many, many companies that are coming back to us today saying, we turned it on, and yeah, people are using it for chats, meetings, and calls, but we haven't really gotten that additional return on investment through the use of this group collaboration, through the ability to create these teams, and for people to really understand how to use those, how to organize those. So definitely be intentional about it. And adoption and organizational change management, it's not just about training. It has to be much more than that, because what you have to do to really reap the benefits of teams is change the behavior of the people in the company. And just turning on a new technology and training a few people, that's not going to change their technology. Lastly, don't just jump on the app of the day. New apps come out all the time, and somebody's going to say, hey, I like this project management tool, and I saw that there's a great integration with Teams. Just because a person really likes it, you all know, doesn't necessarily mean that's something that we need to do at the enterprise level. So really take some analysis into it and figure out what apps are going to be best for you, especially if you're going to be integrating within Teams. So in conclusion, pretty much right on time, that's good. In conclusion, really leverage those teams for your project management. So for those 48% that are using Teams only and not doing projects, I've given hopefully a few tips out there to help figure out how can I continue to increase the overall usage of my teams. If you're one of those companies that use Teams just mainly because of COVID and you were trying to just get chats and meetings and calls in place, cool, but there's so much more to it. Don't miss out on all that extra value. And then for those that are actually using Teams and project management tools, keep doing it, keep leveraging it, and hopefully, I've been able to give you a few extra tips. And again, if you have some extra tips, send them back my way about how we can do better project management within Teams. Adoption, don't forget adoption. Be intentional about it. Have an adoption program, have an organizational change management program, because if you don't, even the IT people, it can be difficult for them to change their behavior, especially in today's world where we have all of these different types of users, from the 20-year-olds to the old folks like myself, and trying to get all of these people to use an application like Microsoft Teams can be a challenge. Each one is going to come to the table with slightly different backgrounds, slightly different needs. They might not really understand what's in it for me, and that's where you have to have that OCM. And then lastly, governance. Don't just turn it on. really look at your policies. If you have just turned it on and things are just going out of control, it's not too late. It can be difficult to pull the reins back in and tell people, hey, I'm going to start taking away a few things. Yeah, you can no longer click on that button as easy as you used to in order to create a team. We're going to put some governance around it. So these three together, I think, will really help show that teams plus that project management can really be leveraged to best support your organization. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to Jansen.
All right, thank you, Mike.
Yep.
So we were just checking here internally since we are running right on time. Originally, we were going to hold for questions at the end. However, I think we've got a little bit of time where we could do some of the questions that have come up now.
Good.
So we can do those before we jump into the panel.
All right.
So first one, if we're using MS Project and it does not show up as an optional app to add a tab,
yep,
is that expected? Are there any other steps, or is that possible to do licensing?
No, it is expected, and it's actually kind of surprising, isn't it? It's a Microsoft product. It's been around for a long time, and when you click on this little tab here, if I type in project and search for it, it doesn't come up. So the trick there is to get that URL of your project online site and then add it as a website. It's not without its flaws when you do this website. There are some situations, some circumstances where it's not going to show up properly, and you may have to open it up still on a separate website. But in the end, even that is pretty easy, because all you have to do is click on the buttons, get the URL, open it up in a separate website. But yeah, add a website as the app.
Okay. Next one is around real-time updates. Does it lock out users while others are entering info?
Oh, that's a great question. And since we have time, I didn't think we would. I will show you exactly the answer to your question through demo. So I have this team out here, and yes, Megan and Leon, you're on deck here. So I have this team that we created earlier, and I added Megan. By the way, Megan Connington, she is to this team, this is a demo team, she is an external guest. I added her as a guest. I also added Leon as a guest. And once I did that, I went in and I created this project status report document, and then I made it as a tab, because we want people to access this thing all the time. We don't want them to search through the hundreds of files that maybe exist in that files tab that I showed you. So now that I'm in here, we hopefully will see that Megan and Leon may be in this. Get rid of this. And sure enough, there's Leon and there is Megan, and the two of them are co-authoring. So this is, if you want to get more information on it, look up co-authoring. And I can also do all of my changes while they're making their changes. Pretty cool feature. And this scares some people, right? And they're like, oh no, what happens if Megan messes up or Mike messes up? Well, what I can do, I can also click into here, click on info. I can look at my version history. And at this point in time, I can at any moment in time go back to previous versions if I wanted. Okay? So the answer to your question, it does not lock it out. Co-authoring gives you this capability, and whether I'm inside of Teams or if I open this inside of Microsoft Word, I probably won't be able to do this because it's a different tenant. Either way, if I open it up inside of Word, like I have here, I still see that Megan is in it and Leona is in it. So again, this is inside of Microsoft Word, not even inside of Teams. But this file still exists within Teams. I'm not making any copies. I'm not downloading anything. My authoritative location for that status report is right there. Next question.
Very cool. Do you have any tips for notification settings?
Notification settings, yes. So notification settings is one of the most often forgotten areas. And in this case, for this meeting here, I didn't want people disturbing me in my Teams by having notifications pop up. So before I even started this, I clicked on Do Not Disturb. This does actually look at your calendar, and it will keep your presence available busy, if you're in a meeting or whatever, it will show that directly in here. And then the settings themselves, if I click on settings, actually, let me show you the easier way now. This just came out about a week ago. If I look in the activity feed, there's this gear setting now. This just showed up in most people's clients probably about a week, 2 weeks ago. If I click on that, there's my notification settings. I could have gotten it by going to there and click on settings and notifications. Within here, this is where you can change your own personal settings, how often you want to be notified, and by which means. My main recommendation on this is to modify this setting right here. Within the other section of notifications, missed activity emails. If you have it set as once every 8 hours and you're not in Teams very often, you're not even going to get emails. If you're in Teams often, but maybe you're gone occasionally, you go to lunch and maybe you want to get notified by your phone app or by your email that somebody's been trying to contact you, you can get an email activity report right there. So that's my main key on that. Other than that, most of this is really your own personal desires, how you like to be notified, whether it's by banner, meaning a little pop-up down here, by email, or the feed, meaning that information feed up there. Next question.
Very good. All right. So we'll do this one last. I know that we've got a number of other questions that have come in since we started here. So I think we'll hold till the end. And if we do not get to your question live, we will answer it via email. So last one that we'll do in this segment is, what do you do with the project artifacts after the project completes? And what do you recommend?
Yeah, so great question. My favorite subject is life cycle of teams. And in the end, you have a whole bunch of files that are being created and stored in here. And you don't want these teams just to sit around and languish. It just clutters up people's information, especially if they start searching on information. So my typical recommendation is, if you have a repository like a SharePoint online site, where that's your authoritative location to back up information, I would take an item like this and all of my files, and then I would move them. I wouldn't copy them. I would move them to that authoritative location, offload it, and that way, ultimately, I can delete this team and get rid of it, but make sure that it's still, the authoritative documents are still accessible in this other location. You can do some moves from within Teams, but when you come across like a folder, you'll note that I don't even have the option to move that folder. In order to move folders, you actually have to open up the underlying SharePoint site. Once you have that underlying SharePoint site opened, you can take a folder and move it from within there. And if I say move to, and then I can select the site that is the authoritative location where we store historical archived project information. Okay. Thanks, Jansen. Really, I'm so glad that we had time to ask and answer some questions. Really appreciate it. I love doing that.
So just before we bring up our distinguished panelists, we put this slide in here as a reminder. If you are interested in learning more about how we can potentially help you with Teams or a variety of other Microsoft 365 workloads, please take down Jim McKean's contact information. Many of you know Jim. We also had Mike's information up front. And with that, I think we will pass it on to the panel. And I will ask our panelists to come back off mute and light up their webcams. And I see Leon and Kathy and Tracy. All right. Well, welcome everyone. So since we had Mike McNett joining us from our national Teams practice, we wanted to really make sure that, especially since this is South Florida PMI, that we had a panel that was really representative of our local PMI community. So we have Leon, Kathy, and Tracy here, and I thank you all for joining us. And I would now like the panelists to introduce themselves, and I will ask Kathy to go first. Oh, and Kathy, you may be on mute.
Okay, sorry about that.
There we go.
Welcome everybody, and I'm glad that you got to join us this evening. Michael did a great job walking us through Microsoft Teams. My name is Kathy Erickson. I've been in South Florida building PMOs and gone through all of the tool sets associated with project management for the last 20 years in South Florida. I've also been on the board with South Florida PMI for a total of 14, 15 years, including president, past president, VP membership. And I'm excited to be here tonight for any questions that anybody wants to answer about Microsoft Teams and my journey through PMOs of South Florida. I have utilized Microsoft Teams and am happy to be here for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kathy. And Leon.
Hi, I'm Leon Green. I'm the director for the project management office at Vitas Healthcare. And I've been in South Florida now for about 25 years. I relocated from Massachusetts back in 1995, where I worked with several healthcare companies there. Started with also some consulting companies like KPMG Consulting. I'm a former member of the PMI board. I'm actually a PMP. I served on the board back in 99, 2001, 2002. And I'm just really glad that I have this opportunity to share some of the really, I would say, innovative things that we are doing with teams at Vitas, both in response to COVID as well as in just general project delivery. So I'm glad to have this opportunity to share with you.
Thank you, Leon. And last but not least, Tracy. Oh, and Tracy, you may be on mute.
That again. Better?
There we go. But maybe with an echo.
She may have like two things, like a phone as well as a computer.
That's,
Yeah.
no, we've still got you muted.
If I unmute, now?
Hey Tracy, if you just turn your computer volume down.
I will call back in.
Okay, Tracy's going to come back in. So in the meantime, we will start with Leon. I'm really excited to hear input from your experience. We heard a lot of sort of the theoretical and how we are seeing things on the Centric side from Mike. But Leon, I guess at Vitas, so you guys have been using Teams for a couple of years now. Can you share some of the ways that it has helped you manage projects effectively? Oh, and I think you need to unmute because I think everyone got muted when we were trying to sort out the audio issues. Nope, still muted.
Okay, there we go.
There we go.
Okay, yeah. So our journey with Microsoft Teams, and I call it a journey because we're still on it, right? We're not done with it. Really started probably, I would say, a couple of years ago. Within the PMO, we're always trying to refresh our toolbox. So you have first it was SharePoint, and we'd have our projects, and we'd pretty much use SharePoint as just a repository. At least you had one place you could check in all your collateral from the project, all your work products. But they were also, they were still kind of, not connected. You have SharePoint, you have a project file, you have a Word document for deliver, etc. And then we came across Team as part of our Microsoft bundle with our Enterprise Architect agreement. And we started just playing around with it just within the PMO on a few projects to kind of get used to it. And it really just caught on like a wildfire. For some reason, all the PMs and the VAs just really love that. an 8-person PMO group. So I have like, 4 PMs, 4 BAs kind of even out. And they really just gravitated to this because they really got tired of sending a lot of emails, attaching files to PeopleSoft or uploading files to PeopleSoft. And we just started using it in that very small setting and to kind of educate ourselves, because I realized that we were kind of learning as we go. We'd go there and find websites or YouTubes or stuff like that, which we had Magnet at the time. That would be really great to kind of educate ourselves on it, and we kind of learn as we go. But then it kind of caught on big when we found out that you could literally now access other applications like Smartsheet, like OneNote, and have that one space where we could create channels. And just like how Mike showed, it could be a waterfall project, and you have your initiate, planning, execution, closing phases, or you could do agile. And we're kind of a hybrid shop. We use both, agile, Scrum, as well as waterfall, depending on the type of project. And it suited both. So the project methodology didn't really restrict it any at all. But this one space where I could create several projects, right? And each project have their channels, and then we could invite in our customers, which are mainly internal. It will be the other departments like, marketing or sales or program ops. And then the fact that they could privately communicate and collaborate over their project, you could schedule your stand-up meetings within that same environment. It just kind of shut off in a big time. Then the other department got wind of this, right? And they started just using it, and it became kind of unstructured usage. So we realized we have to kind of circle the wagons fast, and we started to now move into more governance and adoption and standardization. But it's the type of application, I think, that once the general user gets wind of it, um, it's so intuitive, so easy to use that they'll jump in there. We find that we're able to bring greater value and visibility, which was always a knock against IT. We put a request in as a customer, and we don't know what's happening with our request. We have to wait, until a weekly status update or a monthly, quarterly update before we know what's happening. The fact that they can be part of the development of their product and see the day-to-day action on it and collaborate with us as we develop it and deliver it, it kind of gives you a lot of buy-in to the actual delivery of that project. And so it has caught on now as probably one of the main vehicles for doing project, at least at VTest.
No, it's fantastic. All right, thank you for sharing that. Turning to Kathy for a sec. So Kathy, you mentioned during your time at Ryder that you guys were rolling out Agile, and you felt that teams definitely helped improve communication. Can you share your thoughts around how, in the current expanded work from home environment, teams can help replace that sort of walking the halls that project managers like to do?
Sure. So this is an exciting topic for me, and I'm going to actually speak to the use of teams, especially the collaboration during the COVID-19. As a PMO owner and having multiple project teams, we had dual ownership of a lot of the projects as we were going through transformation at Ryder, from waterfall to Watergile to full-blown agile, and then a Kanban in between as well. And that's when we started using Microsoft Teams. Earlier, we heard Michael talk about governance, and one of the early lessons learned we experienced was we kind of opened it up and let different Scrum Masters and different project managers kind of set up their teams the easiest way that they could find. And what happens if you had a project sponsor or a product owner who had multiple initiatives, they would go to be a part of one team, and that team's board would look like A. They'd go to another one of their initiatives, and the information that they saw on this board was in a different location, and it wasn't, so now they had 3 or 4 teams that they were working with, and none of those teams had the same templates and the same look and feel. So that was a lesson that we had learned early. Now that COVID-19 has happened, from a collaborative perspective, people asked me when they found out that I was going to be part of this panel, Kathy, really, why would a company invest in teams, especially now? And my answer is, why would a company not? It really does allow every team member, regardless if you're waterfall, water agile, full-blown agile, it doesn't matter. When Teams is set up properly, you can have collaboration times X when you're using this, because you don't have the advantage of the hallway conversations. You can simply ping very easily your product owner or your project sponsor and say, hey, first of all, everybody's going to go there for the information. They're not going to go to email for a piece of information. They're not going to be opening links. They're not going to be opening different applications. They've got one spot to go. And if it's installed and set up with governance, like Michael had talked about earlier, Jansen, then it's a product owner and a company's advantage to have the Teams set up, because it really allows those product owners one-stop shop. It allows a project manager one-stop shop. I know where my team is. I have the channels within my team to communicate. Michael also talked about, organizational change and, readiness. I mean, you could have a specific channel dedicated to those audiences as your new product or project is being introduced, to make sure that you've got all those communications in that channel, you've got the right audiences, a separate channel for your development teams. I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. But again, I would caution, make sure that you have templates, you work with a company that's familiar with implementing Teams, and that you really get that governance up front. You get the governance up front, and you get your leadership involved in getting that governance identified and put into place. And we were using it for a project where part of our team was a vendor in Sweden. And, they were way off on hours than our local team was. So they would go in, they would update everything at night, and we, the team members, be the product owner or, the developers or the BAs, would go in and they'd be able to immediately see everything that had been updated. They got their alerts. They didn't have to check their emails. They didn't have to go and open all these everything was right there. So now COVID-19, somebody logs in, they're a team member, they go straight to their team site. They've got everything right there that they need, and they can deal with their other responsibilities outside of that team, and not have to search for stuff. So why wouldn't you use it? Doesn't make sense.
Well, and I think one of the other things that comes up is prior, obviously, to COVID, one of the things that we talked about a lot in these types of discussions was the advent of the multi-generational workforce, right? And that we're having, 5 generations or whatever it is now working. We may even have 5 generations on this call. I'm sure we do amongst all of the attendees for sure.
Be careful, and be careful.
I'm treading on thin ice here. But it's definitely something that, that we found that Teams helps you manage your stakeholder communication preferences in the way that those folks want to receive that communication, right? There are millennials that we deal with, for instance, that, ask you if you phone them, what is the emergency? Why are you phoning me? Is the building on fire? Did something happen? But there are other folks, from a different generation that's their preferred method of communication. So have you guys, seen Teams be a tool that can be used in that way as well?
So the push versus pull, I mean, it's all one-stop shop again. You just mentioned multiple generations that, I work with multiple generations. I'm not going to say how many, because that would be giving my own away, but a variety of generations. And there is a specific generation who only wants to hear from you if you have something that you need to push, that they need to act on. Other than that, don't bother me. You will also have a generation that wants to know everything, especially during COVID. I am so against micromanagement. It's not funny, but I can't change every micromanager out there. This is truly an answer for those that must do micromanagement. They go to the team site, they see the updates being done, they see the progress being made. I mean, it really does, it stops that having to reach out and ping everybody. What time did you log on? What are you doing today? So, that's from one gamut to the other when it comes to that generation conversation that was had earlier. It's, like I said, it's a one-stop shop, and it does address the millennials, and it does address, the hippie generation, and
I would say hippie, but I would say the generation that does everything on their mobile device. In my team, I have a couple of business analysts and the younger folks than myself who they do everything on that mobile device, that iPhone or that Android or Microsoft, doesn't matter what type of mobile device. You're not going to get them necessarily jumping on a desktop machine to um, collaborate on a project all the time, right? They're on the move. They want to be able to just pull this up quickly on their iPhone wherever they are, and they can collaborate with you on the project because they're in a particular team on a particular channel that's specific to their project. And so it does accommodate that difference in generation that we do find in the workplace, and you're going to find more of it. The fact that you can run this thing from a mobile device, handheld, or on your desktop, doesn't matter. So it does span the generations.
Sure. So we're gonna do a quick check-in with Tracy. I see Tracy's back. How's your audio then?
Can you hear me this time?
Much
We
better.
can, and no echo.
So I would add to that the nice thing about teams, I used to do at the beginning of a project a check with everyone. Okay, what's your preferred style? What about if there's an emergency after hours? What number do I call? What about, can I call your mobile phone? That type of thing. With Teams, I don't have to anymore. I can contact on Teams. People can opt in. They have the option of turning things off at the time that they choose. With Teams, I can message them there. They've got it shut off if they've chosen to do that, if they don't want to be contacted there. I don't have to worry about seeking them out or asking them if this is okay. They've got all of that set on their own. They've got their notifications tweaked to what they want. It takes out all of that work of having to set things up and asking about whether it's okay on the weekends. All of that work, project management wise, at the beginning of a project is gone. That's just disappeared.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess Tracy, we'll come back to you again since you were MIA there for a little bit. So with you coming at this from both sides, and actually I just realized that we didn't really give you a chance to give an introduction. So maybe after this question, if you want to introduce yourself first. But while you're managing projects here at Centric, as well as consulting with clients, do you have any general tips and tricks that you'd like to share?
So I think that the nice thing about Teams is that it's part of the Microsoft world. And if I need to look for something, I can step back and go to like an office.com. It's part of Microsoft Search. So going to office.com itself, it searches everywhere. So it searches it searches all documents, it searches all Teams. So going to that one website, I don't have to look on my computer. I don't have to look through Teams. I don't have to look through SharePoint sites. That one place, going to office.com, looks through every single document on every single SharePoint site, every single team, every single OneNote notebook that I have access to, and my entire OneDrive, period, in one place. So that is incredible. I know that, and because I've got all of those things hooked up, I know that if I'm going to work on something, it's going to be on OneDrive or Teams because I want it to upload to the cloud. I want to never lose it. So that is so nice. I don't lose documents anymore. So I always work in Teams, which is naturally connected to SharePoint. It's just so nice. So one, I make sure that everything is synced locally. It's just like working on my computer, just like I used to, except everything's connected to the cloud, so it automatically appears in Teams. So I do, if I'm ever looking for something and I don't see it right away, or I can't remember where I may have put it, I go to office.com. So having that connection to that Microsoft search world is great. So that is really nice. And then syncing files locally. So even if I put something in Teams, taking the time to press the sync button and having it there locally is really nice, where I can visualize it. So even if it's in the cloud, having it there, and it feels just like that old Windows world, it's really nice. And for a lot of people, that it feels just like the old way, and having that visual file and having it feel just like the old system connecting for them where maybe it didn't if it's just only on the web. Sometimes that rounds things out where it looking like the old way, it then makes sense. So I would suggest those couple of things.
Very good. Kathy and Leon, anything to add in terms of tips and tricks?
Go ahead, Leon. Or was that me or Leon?
No, you can go ahead, Kathy. I'll pinch in at the end.
So one of the things, and there are probably leaders on this call that may or may not like what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm one of those leaders in project management and in business in general where I am very empathetic. And COVID-19 right now has multiple people in the same family sharing workspaces. It has, parents that have children in the house while they're trying to work. Having Microsoft Teams and a little tip that I have found with any communication during COVID-19 is to set up fun time, be it half an hour, 20 minutes, make it 10 minutes before a regular team meeting, to have the personal side. You've got people on a video call. If people don't want to turn on their cameras because they've got child climbing on their lap, which happened to me recently with my grandson, that's okay. But you want to find out, you want to know, you want to understand the challenges that they may be having beyond the screen so that you can provide an outlet for them that using Microsoft Teams, like the video and the chats, that allow them to release some of those frustrations and ease up some of the pressure so they can focus on what you need them to do as team members. So, as you're setting up your teams, as companies are talking through the governance, and not just during, the COVID-19 challenge, but once some of us go back to, the environments and we get to have those hallway conversations, let's not forget that there are still people who are going to be remote. The world will not be back to what it was before. And we still need to have those little tips and tricks to, keep the empathy with our workforce and to use our tools that are driving our business to drive those relationships during a difficult time. Same tool, different channel, have it within a team to say, hey, send pictures of your dog. If your kid or your child had an accomplishment, share it over on this channel. And, expand the use of it so that it fits your teams and it makes them comfortable and makes them want to be part of your teams.
That's great. I would have two tips because at Vitas we have certainly expanded the use of it. It has gone much further than just a project management, collaboration, communication space to also an application development front end. Microsoft Teams really accelerated telehealth for us. And the genesis of that was really with CMS when they removed the guidelines or the regulations on doing FaceTime with your patient. Previously, in our care, you have to be there physically with the patient to do what they call a face-to-face visit. And when they relaxed that regulation that says you could do that through electronic media, we decided that Microsoft Teams would be a great front end because one, it was on all the devices already, all our clinicians were using it. So having it as a UI, a user interface to do what we call virtual visits for patients, especially when, for example, some of our patients are in locations where clinicians weren't allowed because of COVID. And we take care of, as you know, with hospice care, it's chronically ill patients. So in some cases, a family member may not want Vitas, nurse or whoever in that room with the patient. Then we could do FaceTime with them. We could do our visits in that way and also infection control. So we have two applications pretty much that uses that type of front end that allows us to deliver care, at least visits and infection control in a virtual environment. So Teams became the front end to a Microsoft backend, which is really Dynamics 365. And so we're pushing the envelope on this because we're seeing it more than just an application, collaboration and communication. It can be also a great application as a front-end user interface. With that said, though, here's the second tip. It means then that we had to build some type of a support structure for that back end piece. It's going to tax your communication infrastructure, so you have to make sure you have the networks with the right bandwidth, with the power to keep it up and going and live. And also it means that we have to standardize real fast in terms of creating our governance to make sure, as Kathy just said, all your templates that goes out are following a certain standard. When you take teams out of the box, most of it is turned on. You may not want everyone in a team to be able to create, or everyone that have access to Microsoft Teams to be able to create teams. Because then if everybody can create a team after a while, it becomes a big jungle, right? So we had to go behind the scenes with our telecom expertise and decide what we would allow users to do and what we would not allow them to do, right? So they can't create teams, only certain groups can create teams and that type of stuff. So you have to really look at the standardization you want and then implement the governance to make sure it's a standard, because now it becomes customer facing. So you want it to have a standard look and feel that represent the brand of your company. And if you're going to use it for any type of application interface, which is this is at the next level that we're at in our journey.
Very good. All right, so we're just on 7:20 now. So maybe what we'll do at this point is we'll pick up the Q&A again, because we have had additional questions come in here from the audience. I'd say maybe if Mike McNett's on as well, if you wanna come back on, and I can have Mike plus the panelists, because there's kind of a mix of questions here. I guess while Mike's coming back on, first question, how has the feedback been from the project teams and the stakeholders? So for Leon and Kathy especially, are your project teams and stakeholders liking it?
Please go, Leon.
Okay, in my case, as I started out, our project team kind of drove this. As we said, we were just playing around, we saw this, and they were all over it. So the project teams love it, and we're in the PMO, we're managing, but the developers also like the fact that they can be in that same space, right? As well as your infrastructure folks. So that makes up a project team. Now, our business users, or what we call our customers, they got wind of it and they wanted to be the early adopters. So you have, for example, VP of sales, marketing, they want to be the early adopters, which puts us in a good spot because they become the evangelists for this now. They command a large portion of our staff, especially corporate staff. And so they want to be the ones out front, being part of the governance committee. They're the ones that we're going to know to say, hey, tell me about some of the pain points you have in your business processes. Let us see if we can automate some of it. Much of like what Mike did earlier, where we use Power Automate to automate the creation of teams. You're talking about a Microsoft Power Platform that comes with Power Automate, Graph API. And so as we're reaching out to these groups and we're seeing some of the mundane, repetitive business process tasks that they execute, they're now coming to us to say, oh, can you help us solve these problems in a more automated way? And we're on one platform, which is Microsoft Teams, that's then augmented with all the other Microsoft Power Apps and Power Automate that comes with one package. So we find that if you can find groups on the business side which can become your evangelists for this, then they'll also push the standards and the governance infrastructure that you're trying to put in, because they've seen the benefit of it for their particular groups. So in fact, it's a challenge just to even rein them in, because they wanted us to use it for almost everything. So if you don't have that governance in quickly, then it can get really out of hand, right?
So, all right. Oh, actually, here's an interesting one. I've seen this pop up a few times. And Mike, you had touched on this briefly, I think, at the beginning of your presentation. So folks are using Teams at work. Can and how can they get Teams for personal use? Oh, Mike seems to be on mute.
There we go.
There we go.
All right, so the question was, how can people get it for personal use?
Yep.
Just go to, just do a Bing search, a Google search, whatever your favorite search is on downloading Teams, and you can get it. It's free, and recently they just announced, and I think they actually have it enabled now, where you can even on the personal side schedule meetings, whereas before you couldn't do that on your personal team side. But with that new feature, yep, fully available to you.
Very good. All right. Questions here. Okay. Can you manage access at the team level for each of the project channels?
So Teams philosophy is, let me give a large group of people access to everything within the team. You can create specific permissions by creating private channels across your team. So you could, not saying you should, have like 5 different private channels with different membership. That is typically not a good use case for it, for private channels. Instead, you use private channels for the purpose of protecting sensitive or confidential information. Because as soon as you create that private channel, it's a whole separate permissions management structure. And then there's a whole bunch of headaches for the administrators of your teams and your SharePoint sites on the back end. So while you can do it, probably shouldn't unless you really have a need to protect some sensitive or confidential information.
Got it. Okay. Let's see here. For Microsoft Project, would you recommend having only one plan? Oh, hold on, my questions are jumping around here. There we go. My team is creating a new version every time a change is made.
A new plan. So was that for a project question or planner? I didn't quite understand it.
It was Jose. If Jose is out there and you want to submit an update.
So what was the question again there, Jansen?
Same. That for Microsoft Project, would you recommend only having one plan? My team creates a new version every time a change is made.
I'm not real sure, but anytime I hear multiple versions,
Not good. Not
yeah,
good. Not good.
recommend against it. It's good to have version history, but not necessarily new versions every time.
One thing that we did, and we're using Smartsheet, so we're integrating Teams with a non-Microsoft product, which is Smartsheet, simply because we get both the Microsoft project plan within Smartsheet, as well as you have risk, action item, issues, decision. Those are as logs that come with it. So we find that that package to be great. But we still have people who do their Microsoft project plan, and that's a classic one where you may want to have a private channel where you just have the project manager, probably the project manager, the business analyst, having access to the plan to make updates. And then you do what Mike did earlier, you just get a URL for that location. And so everyone else on the project can have a view into the plan, but they really can't make a change. So by controlling updates to the plan with that private channel, there's no reason for you to change the version each time. If Microsoft updates its version, then the data comes over into the new version. But you remove the risk of people making changes so that they have to create a new version of the plan. I think that's what's happening by just limiting who can edit the actual plan, which is your private channel folks, and just have a few people there. And then you kind of publish the plan for general consumption for everyone else that's on the team. And that way they see the plan, but they really don't walk all over it and make a whole bunch of changes.
And I think what you could do, even in that case, is if within the project site for the project plan, you modify the permissions to give everyone read access, but then that way you wouldn't even need to have that private channel. But you as a project manager who has write access, it would say, yep, I recognize that Leon has write access. I'm going to let him change it. But Jansen, you only have read access. You can't change it.
Yep. No, that's a good one. Okay, since we're coming up to time, we'll do one more here. This is for any of our ServiceNow users out there, and I've seen a few of them in the guest list. But so question is, I love Teams, but how do you recommend balancing using Teams and an existing enterprise-wide project management tool, especially if it doesn't integrate with Teams, i.e. ServiceNow?
Leon, you got some advice there?
I'll jump in on this one because we did run into that dilemma. So years ago, we did implement ServiceNow, but the thing with ServiceNow is its strength, at least as far as I'm concerned, it's really a service management tool. So it's for incidents and ticket management and this type of service desk type of stuff. Recently, over a last few versions, they have stuck on a module called a project portfolio management module. For me personally, it still is a bolt-on. It's like they took whatever was in Microsoft projects and they kind of bolted it on. It's not, it's maturing, but it's still quite a bit of work. What we did, and we're still tweaking that, is that Smartsheet, and then I believe Microsoft project has the same thing. They have a API that allows you to connect directly between either Smartsheet or Microsoft project into ServiceNow. So what my team does is they live in Smartsheet from working, with Microsoft Teams, but those updates are then automatically synced over to ServiceNow. So you still can go in ServiceNow and do whatever you need to do with your project data. You still can do your dashboards and all that good stuff. You still have one ecosystem where all your data is pretty much together, even though there are multiple systems. We kind of use ServiceNow as the mothership, the backend, because it's collecting all of that service-oriented data, service management data, incident management, tickets, problem management. It's still doing all of that. And then it has the project management data coming from Smartsheet and through interaction with Microsoft Teams, and it creates one pot of data. So there's just one version of the truth. So that's the integration that we've found. There are connectors or APIs that can go from either projects to ServiceNow or from Microsoft or from Smartsheet to ServiceNow. Just do a little bit of research. The thing is, though, you're gonna have to find an integrator to do that integration for you. It's not, at first we thought it was just open it, point and click and you get there. No, we had to bring in an integrator to get it working properly.
Yeah, and there are some integration points even directly between ServiceNow and Teams.
Yeah, true.
So if you wanted to go that route, it's possible, but I think from a project management perspective, I think Leon has some great points there.
Very good. Well, with that, we are now at 7:31. So I will first of all thank all of our attendees for joining us this evening. This is basically the reason why we put these on. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your evening to join us. Thank you to South Florida PMI and Gustavo for hosting us. And then thank you to our illustrious panelists, Kathy, Leon, Tracy, and finally our presenter, Mike. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
All right. We wish you all a wonderful evening. And we hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
And you as well.